Okay, so you've probably seen this guy, and if you haven't, you've probably seen or at least heard of what he's been in. Jurassic Park, The Mask,
I don't know.
SpongeBob, Futurama, even a few video games and adapted into a comic book. But you probably don't know where he came from, and if you do, you probably don't know exactly how he got here. So, to start off, Providence, Rhode Island, 1947. There, John M. Ozen, an immigrant from Latvia, was working as a foreman for the Davol Rubber Company. Davol mainly made rubber medical equipment such as rubber catheters, which apparently Ozen had quite a few patents for already. But on that particular May of 47, Ozen decided to have a new patent designed with Davol's own lawyer, Nathaniel Fruit, who apparently had represented a few rubber companies in the past. This patent was for a squeezable pop-out action toy. Now there are various designs for this thing. The first is pretty recognizable, however the others, one with teeth and the other that spits water, never really made it past paper. As early as 1950, this thing starts getting manufactured, and not by Davol Rubber, but by a company named Blake Industries, who until then had been making bathing caps, baby pants, and rubber feet for furniture. Blake becomes sole manufacturer for the new toy that they called Jobo. Now the toy, almost immediately, was a success. For the next 5 years, it was promoted in various newspapers, it was sold in camera stores, supermarkets, and department stores. Out of nowhere, it disappeared. By 1955, it was already being reduced in price and cleared from stores, but given that Ozen picked up his social security check just a year prior, it's possible he decided to throw in the towel. But the Jobo had an interesting way to continue living. Just an hour away from Ozen in Quincy, Massachusetts, lived Norman and Malcolm Thatcher. Now I couldn't find much on these two other than the fact that they lived with their parents, possibly up to their deaths. But a mold was discovered years back by a collector for a Jobo toy reading Thatcher on the bottom. And after posting on Flickr to see if anyone had info, someone responded that they used to live near the Thatchers decades ago in Wollaston. According to this random Flickr user, the Thatcher brothers made Jobos in their home, but instead of calling them Jobos, they were called Normies. Now, while there isn't any concrete evidence of this other than the mold, we'll get back to the Thatchers in a minute. By 1969, Jay Lynch, an underground comic artist, was in touch with Louis Berkowitz, who out in San Antonio was running a little magic shop for his company, LB. According to Lynch, Berkowitz, or as others called him, Berkey, had bought the rights to the toy and the molds and had them manufactured in China to be sold in his novelty shop. Now, I'm not sure how realistic it is for a San Antonio-based businessman who makes wooden nickels to be manufacturing toys out in China, but given that the Jobo makes a few appearances in Lynch's works, it's the only explanation that makes sense at the moment. It's not known how long Berkey was making these toys, but for a while, he and the Thatchers were the only people still producing it. Which brings us to David Livingston. By the mid or late 70s, Fort Worth Computer Company employee David Livingston was out in Ann Arbor, Michigan for unknown reasons. There he bought a Jobo toy, and after bringing it back home, it was an immediate hit. So, Livingston wanted to buy around 24 more of them to give to family and friends. Issue is that they didn't come in that quantity. Apparently, the store that bought it from was the only store selling them up there, made by a man who apparently had been making them for around 25 years, and by that time had been making them in his own home, which sounds suspiciously similar to what the Thatchers were doing, so unless there were another pair of men out in Michigan who were also making Jobo toys in their own home, Livingston likely bought a Jobo from the Thatchers. So since the Thatchers couldn't produce as many Jobos to meet Livingston's needs, especially since by then he was desperately wanting to distribute them, Livingston decided to design his own Jobo from the ground up. Since the original patent had already expired by 1971, rights wouldn't really be a problem. He partnered up with his father and father-in-law, and they got working. By 1978, it's launched. This new one looks the same as the old one, just creepier, and now it's naked. This version was called Obi, and Obi now has a brother, the Greenie Weenie. The Greenie Weenie didn't last long. So many people considered it phallic that the only place it seemed to really have sold is Spencer's Gifts. But anyway, Livingston had great success with the Obi. So much so that the expensive latex and dip forming process needed good, inexpensive labor. So Livingston had the children of the Abilene State School of the Mentally Retarded assemble the pieces he had manufactured somewhere else into Obis, which, according to Livingston, was more for the benefit of the children than the sales. Obi had a deluxe version, the executive Obi, whose only difference was a wooden base. However, Livingston's OB operation didn't last too long. By 1985, Archie McPhee, a now much more well-known novelty company that had just been starting out by then, had started distributing them in their stores under the name Martian Popping Doll and Martian Cuke. These were being manufactured by an unknown company named Alico, likely in Taiwan. This version is identical to Livingston's, so it's possible Livingston had the rubber pieces formed in Taiwan and imported into the US for assembly. So the Martian was a success, and it'd be the first time that it would be marketed for stress relief. By 1988, it'd be renamed the Martian Popping Thing, and by 1991, it was redesigned entirely again into a clown. The reasoning why that isn't really known. Archie McPhee continued to sell that design for quite a while, until 2007, when Toysmith, another well-known company, has started distributing the exact same version under the name Bug-Out Bob. It's not known why or how this happened, and just a year later, Schilling was also doing the same thing, now under the name Panic Pete. And meanwhile, in the UK, a toy company called Tobar was also distributing it under the name Popping Martian. So for a brief period, 4 companies were distributing the exact same product under 4 different names. That is until 2009, when Schilling redesigns the toy yet again. So now instead of being entirely rubber, his appendages are now plastic. For whatever reason, this was adopted as the definitive version, and over time, Pete's ancestors would fade away, until McPhee finally stopped distributing the toy around 2018. Panic Pete is now the only version of the toy still produced and sold. So, contrary to popular belief, Pete was not always a stress toy. He's not a baby toy, nor is he the victim of the Mandela effect. Such an iconic toy, it's curious why its history is so buried in the sand. The original incarnation of this toy hasn't been sold for the past 7 decades. What we have now is really only the same in concept rather than design, so it makes me wonder how retro this toy really is. But if Archie McPhee ever has the chance to sell the old version again, I'll probably be the first in line, because for whatever reason, I've really grown attached to this thing.